The shadows have stories to tell, but not everyone dares to listen. They whisper in the dead of night, waiting for someone brave enough to hear them. Schools are meant to be places of learning, of discipline, but some lessons come at a price. Let me tell you 5 stories, stories of students who learned the hard way. Tan was a master of deception. He never studied, yet his grades were always perfect. His secret, a tiny folded cheat sheet tucked in his palm during every test. It was his lifeline, and no one had ever caught him. Until one day, during the final exams, he felt a chill down his spine. Looking up, he saw a girl sitting in the front row. She wasn't supposed to be there. She wasn't in his class. And yet, she watched him. When the test was over, he unfolded his cheat sheet and gasped. The words had disappeared. In their place, strange symbols had burned into the paper. Then the ink bled from the sheet onto his hands. He tried to wipe it away, but it only spread, seeping into his skin, embedding itself under his nails. That night, Tan tried to write an apology letter to his teacher, but the letters on the page twisted into nonsense. His texts, his notes, every word turned into symbols only he could see. His perfect grades? Useless now, because no matter how much he tried, he could no longer read or write. He rushed to the hospital, hoping for an answer. Doctors called it a psychological block, but Tan knew better. The girl had done this to him. He tried to find her, asking his classmates, searching old records, but no one remembered her. It was as if she had never existed. Desperate, he returned to the classroom late one night, clutching an old test paper. He whispered an apology into the silence, hoping she was listening. The overhead light flickered, and for a brief moment, he saw her reflection in the window, smiling. The next morning, he woke up able to read again, but he never dared to cheat after that, because he knew she was still watching. Mint ruled the school through fear, a queen of whispers and cruelty. She thrived on humiliation, turning others into jokes. But she never expected to become one herself. One evening, Mint was alone in the bathroom, fixing her makeup. That's when she heard it, a whisper, faint and mocking, her own voice repeating the insults she'd thrown at others. She spun around. The mirrors reflected not just her own face, but distorted versions of herself, sneering, laughing. Each version echoed her past taunts. Ugly. Worthless. Better off gone. She tried to run, but every hallway led back to the bathroom. Her reflection multiplied, surrounding her, whispering louder and louder. She screamed for help, pounding on the stall door, but no one came. The laughter swelled, deafening. Her own face twisted and warped, her features blending into the very people she had tormented. When the school janitor found her the next morning, she was curled up on the floor, staring blankly at the mirror. She never spoke again. Some say the mirrors in that bathroom still whisper at night. If you stand in front of them alone, you might hear a voice. And if you've ever bullied someone, it just might be your own. B was always there, always listening, always following, but never truly seen. Her so-called friends barely noticed her presence, until the day she vanished. At first, no one cared, but then, strange things started happening. One friend swore they saw B standing outside their window at night. Another received a text from her number. "Did you forget me?" One by one, her friends' profiles vanished from social media, their names erased from school records, until the only one left was the last friend who ignored her. That friend began hearing whispers, their own names spoken softly at night. Footsteps followed them down empty hallways. One day they woke up and found an old class photo on their desk. Only now, B was standing beside them, smiling. Then they started seeing her everywhere. Reflections, passing windows, shadows in crowded hallways. The whispers grew louder until they finally called out her name. The next morning, their desk was empty. Their name, too, was forgotten, and no one remembered them anymore. When the substitute teacher arrived, the class didn't think much of it. Teachers came and went all the time, but something about her felt different. Her eyes, dark and knowing, seemed to peer right through them. And when she spoke, her voice carried an eerie calm, as if she already knew the answers to every question. The lesson began normally, at first. Then, one by one, she called students to the front. Each time, secrets appeared on the whiteboard. She never asked them to speak. She simply wrote. And somehow, the words cut deeper than any punishment ever could. Then she turned to the students who had laughed at others' pain, mocked the weak, or ignored the cries for help. "Now let's see what they say about you," she murmured. Words scrawled onto the board on their own, a cruel tally of all their sins. One student ran to erase them, but the chalk wouldn't budge. The words only grew darker, sharper. Another tried to flee the room, but the door wouldn't open. The lights flickered and the walls felt like they were closing in. The whispers began, low at first, like the murmur of wind through old halls. But soon they became distinct. The voices of those they had wronged, accusations, pleas, cries for help that had once gone ignored. One student, a boy who had spread vicious rumors, clutched his ears, shaking. "I didn't mean it," he whispered. Another, a girl who had turned a blind eye to bullying, found her own name written over and over again on the board, each letter burning into her vision. The substitute watched in silence. She never scolded, never punished. She only revealed what had already been done. Then, just as suddenly as she arrived, she was gone. No one saw her leave. The door unlocked, the lights steadied. The room was silent again. But the board remained, the words remained. And students still swore, even years later, that at night, the chalk moved on its own, writing new names, adding to the list. And if you stayed too long in that classroom after dark, you might just see your own. He stood on the rooftop, breathing shakily, staring at the drop below. No one knew his name. No one cared. He had spent years walking through the halls, a ghost among the living. But tonight, he thought, he would finally disappear. Until she spoke. "If you vanish, you become nothing. But if you stay, you can change your story." Her voice was calm, knowing. He turned and saw her, dark eyes watching him, a small smile that held secrets. He didn't know her, and yet she felt familiar. Something in the way she spoke made him hesitate. He took a step back from the edge. The wind howled around them, but she stood still, unaffected. "Good choice," she murmured, then walked away. The next day, people finally saw him. Teachers called on him in class. Students greeted him in the hallways. It was as if he had always been part of their world. But at night, he felt drawn back to the rooftop. The wind whispered his name. And sometimes, when he looked down, he swore he saw shadows moving along the pavement, shadows with no one to cast them. Weeks passed, and the girl who had spoken to him vanished from the school. No one remembered her. Not a single mention in the yearbook. Not even a record of her enrollment. But he remembered, and the rooftop still called to him. One evening, he stood there again, feeling the weight of the air around him. "Do you want to be remembered?" The voice was softer this time, almost inviting. He turned sharply, but there was no one there. The next morning, students found something new on the rooftop. His name carved into the concrete, deep and jagged as if done by unseen hands. Some say, if you stand there long enough, you might hear the voice too. And if you answer yes, you might not like how she makes it happen. You have listened, but the echoes never stop. They follow you in the silence, in the dark, in the places you fear to look. Like, subscribe, and stay in the shadows.